Massive spoilers for Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Future Redeemed, and subsequently the entire Xenoblade Chronicles series except for Xenoblade X and the DLC stories for Xenoblade 1 and 2. Rex and Shulk are the most beloved characters in the Xenoblade Chronicles series.
Hey, pay attention to me!
Well, besides them. But the writers didn't exactly do a great job at telling us what happened to them at the end of Future Redeemed, which is interesting seeing that their fate will have dramatic implications for the series going forward. As soon as Alpha is gone at the end of Future Redeemed, Rex, Shulk, and A begin to glow yellow with little light motes floating around them, exactly like we see when someone in Xenoblade Chronicles 3 dies, which seems to imply that Rex and Shulk are either already dead or they're dying. Before they even went to Prison Island, Rex and Shulk foreshadow their presumed death by talking about how they're ready to sacrifice themselves for their kids. However, literally everything that they say to Glimmer and Nicole at the end of the game would suggest otherwise. First, they mention how they are helping instead of sacrificing themselves, and that both of these things are fundamentally different from each other. Rex also says, "We'll meet again, trust me," which could mean that Glimmer and Nicole will see them when they die, but this is a bit too grim for his tone, so I think it's more likely that they will see each other again before they die, especially since right before that Rex says, "We're just taking a breather." Rex also says, "Our future is in your hands." What would Rex and Shulk's future matter if they're dead? Shulk follows this up by saying, "We'll be waiting at the far edge of time." Why would they be waiting for someone if they're dead? Rex and Shulk are also seen imbuing their kids with their life force. This really could be an argument for or against them dying, as you can't really imbue people with life unless you yourself either die or you are immortal. In addition to this, it seems like those who are outside of the cycle of the Endless Now, or who are unaffected by its grasp, emit both yellow and blue light motes, as we see when Guernica Van Dam dies. This is contrasted with a Kavesi or Agnian soldier, who only has a single color light mote, that being either yellow or blue, when they die. When Van Dam died, his particles started out yellow, but then they turned blue, possibly to represent that he's neither Agnian nor Kavesi and was not originally part of the world of Ionios. Either way, it at least seems like this is the case for those who aren't affected by Mobius or the Endless Now. So, because Rex and Shulk are also outside of the cycle, when they die, their light motes should also start out yellow, but then turn blue as they fade away. However, we don't ever see them turn blue to indicate that they died. I think this is just one way to tell us that Rex and Shulk aren't dead, but they also aren't really alive either. I know it's confusing, but just stick with me and you'll start to see what I mean in just a second. First, we need to look at the evidence for Rex and Shulk being outside of the cycle of the Endless Now, as it pertains to my point later. And yes, I know I said in my last video that Rex couldn't be the great-great-grandfather of Matthew or the father of Nia because of his age. But this statement completely disregarded the fact that it doesn't really make sense for Rex and Shulk to be alive at this point in time unless they exist outside of the cycle. They, along with others such as Linka and Panacea, were not assimilated into Origin and have thus stopped aging like their original worlds have since they are frozen in time. This actually has further implications that will tie into my overall point later, but for now, yeah, Rex is Mio's dad. Shout out to Hacksox and Extreme Twig for being two of the first to point out the dialogue that supports this theory in Linka's side quest that I just hadn't completed at the time. But let's not forget arguably the most important piece of evidence pointing to Rex and Shulk still technically being alive after the events of Future Redeemed, that A mentions Alpha was the avatar of Ionios, and that she, along with Rex and Shulk, are now taking up that role of avatar for the world. So what does this mean exactly? It seems that Rex, Shulk, and A have taken the place of Numa, Logos, and Ontos in the Trinity processor. I can't take credit for this theory though, so shout out to Jamroll13 for bringing it up. When Nia is explaining to Noah and friends in Xenoblade 3 that Origin failed to reboot, it can be assumed this was the case because it didn't have the power of all three members of the Trinity processor, only Ontos or Alvis. We find that Origin only reboots properly to reunite Bionis and Allrest when Noah, who holds the power of both Numa and Logos, puts an end to Zed and his schemes. If you don't know what I'm talking about, check out my video called Where Were Those Two on the end screen of this video for my reasoning behind why Noah has the power of Numa and Logos. Destroying Zed reunites Numa and Logos with A, who is still Ontos as she essentially is his conscious and possesses his crystal. So Rex and Shulk almost seem to act as placeholders for Numa and Logos to hold down the fort, so to speak, while Numa and Logos provide Noah and the gang with the full Ouroboros powers to help them get rid of Zed. The very thing preventing humanity from moving forward, so that all members of the Trinity processor can reboot Origin properly to reunite Ionios. The reason the complete Trinity processor was needed to reactivate Origin successfully was because, as A tells us, Origin was built from the foundation of the Ontos crystal's architecture. A also mentions that without Numa and Logos, Ontos is just a machine. She says that Ontos was predicated or based upon their existence. Essentially, Ontos can't function at his full potential without the other two members of the Trinity processor. Yes, he can function alone as he did in Bionis, but if his full purpose is to be fulfilled as Origin needed since it's based on him, the other two members of the Trinity processor are needed. They were all meant to work together. It's kind of like making a recipe for something that you want to be chocolate cake, but basing it off of just the chocolate itself and neglecting the rest of the essential ingredients. I know it's a terrible analogy, but I think it gets the point across. To further back this up, Origin is composed of information from both worlds, Bionis and Allrest. And as we know, the Ontos core never existed in the world of Allrest, and the Numa and Logos core never existed in the world of Bionis. I don't think it's a stretch to assume that Origin needs all three cores to successfully merge two separate worlds from which those three cores existed independently of one another, of course with the exception of Logos and Numa. Back to my previous point, Rex and Shulk being outside of the cycle also has a couple of implications that back up these claims. I believe it's essentially fate that Rex and Shulk remain at the age they are at until their task is complete. What I mean by this is that I believe they were meant to be the ones to stand in place of Numa and Logos as part of the Trinity processor, and that they will not die until they have fulfilled that role. This can be backed up at the end of Future Redeemed by Rex saying, "The annihilation events will keep happening whether you like it or not. The world needs a bit of propping up." And in response to Nicole saying, "Don't do this," Shulk says, "It's not like that, we're helping." Shulk seems to be implying that they have a job they need to complete, and Rex seems to imply that they are filling a void with A left by the three core crystals of the Trinity processor. Also, in response to Glimmer saying, "And if we don't manage, then what?" Rex says, "If you don't, pass it on." This implies that Rex and Shulk will essentially be granted all the time they need to wait for the world to be set right, which indicates they'll be kept alive at least until their role is fulfilled and Ionios is properly merged. Rex also says to Glimmer, "As long as you lot do your part to change this world, it'll all go back to normal." I take this to mean that they are aware that they are going to help in the process of rebooting Origin to set the two separate worlds back to their original states, but it doesn't seem like they are aware that they will merge the two worlds just yet. This is further backed up by the fact that Rex seems to be aware of the fact that they are there for some purpose when Matthew questions why they weren't assimilated into Origin. Though again, I don't think he actually knew down to the specifics what that purpose was until they actually defeated Alpha. All of this was obviously not by the design of Alvis, and definitely not the machine half of Alvis, Alpha, seeing as A doesn't seem to control anything any more than Numa or Logos does. In fact, it doesn't even seem like Ontos can even function properly without Numa or Logos. All of this is to say that I think it's the will of the creator of the two worlds, and thus Ionios, that Shulk and Rex stand in for Numa and Logos in order to eventually have the two worlds reunite properly. The creator, of course, is Klaus.
Cheers to old Klaus! His gifts just keep on giving!
I think that at least part of the one last gift that Klaus offered to the world at the end of Xenoblade 2 was not just meant for the world of Allrest, but ultimately for the two worlds of Allrest and Bionis to merge successfully one day. Sure, it was a rocky road to get there, but I think that Klaus always intended for the two worlds to merge once again. Well, at least the good part of him. After granting that last gift before he dies, he even says, "The rest is up to you, my children," indicating that he knows there will be many obstacles in their path, but it's up to them to figure it out. Now let's talk about exactly what all of this means for Rex and Shulk going forward, and how this can impact future Xenoblade games. Taking everything into account, I think we can assume that Rex and Shulk are in between the spiritual and physical world, and will likely remain that way for the next Xenoblade game. It seems they have only started the process of death, as indicated by these single color light motes, and have only partially entered the spiritual realm, but can still communicate and have an impact on the physical realm. I think this means they may not play a main role in the next Xenoblade game. Similar to how we didn't see characters like Fiora, Dunban, Zeke, Morag, or the physical form of Pyra, Mithra, or Malos in Future Redeemed, Rex and Shulk will most likely take a backseat in future Xenoblade games. However, they still could play a huge role if what I'm about to suggest is true. If Rex and Shulk's final purpose has been fulfilled, then we have no need for them anymore, unless they play an even larger role in the next Xenoblade game than the new protagonists themselves. A role similar to that of Klaus in Xenoblade 2 or Ontos in Xenoblade 1, for example. What if Rex and Shulk remain in this godlike state in the newly formed Aionios along with Ontos, Numa, and Logos? Hear me out. Because they stood in for Numa and Logos, Rex and Shulk are now granted that power permanently and become gods to help govern Aionios. They essentially all become a council of gods, no longer tied to their core crystals since they are essentially responsible for the recreation of Earth into, we'll call it New Aionios for now. They would then have the right to do pretty much anything that they please, right? Also, it would be pretty cool for Shulk to be like, yeah, last time I turned down being a god, someone rose up to fill that void anyway and almost killed us all. So maybe I'll take A up on that offer this time since it might as well be someone good with pure intentions like me who fills that role. Think about it. If there were no plans to bring Shulk and Rex back, the writers would have simply just killed them. They wouldn't have made everything so ambiguous. I mean, sure, there's a possibility they may never show up again and the writers just wanted the option to bring them back if it made sense to put them in the story, but I think Monolith Soft is more crafty than that. I haven't been in the Xenoblade community very long, but I've been around long enough to know that we get very little in terms of clear-cut answers. Even 13 years later at the conclusion of the Klaus saga, we're still left with more questions than answers, filling in the blanks as best we can. To be honest though, I think it makes it more fun to be able to speculate back and forth with each other. You know what else is fun? If you enjoy this type of content, consider subscribing, as my goal is to try to hit 1,000 by the end of this year, and your help would be greatly appreciated. As always, thanks for watching till the end.